Okay, good morning everybody. Welcome to this second panel discussion at the State of the Union. I'm very pleased to welcome also the speakers, and I will introduce them when I say what this panel is about. The theme of the panel is the future of citizenship. Understanding citizenship now as a relation that connects individuals and states. There have been discussions in the academic literature about the future of citizenship, whether this relation is still strong and holding, or whether it becomes weaker and more tenuous. Scholars like Christian Jobke have suggested that in a liberal framework, citizenship is becoming citizenship light. It has no more real weight. Among the lawyers, Peter Spiro has also written about a decline of citizenship on a global scale. Now, we want to find out whether this is actually true and how it works out in Europe. So the question that I've suggested that we should discuss in the European context is citizenship in Europe just about useful passports that you can use for traveling not just within Europe but worldwide? Or is it still about some form of genuine links that individuals have with the member states and with the Union itself? We have invited 4 speakers who will discuss 4 different aspects of this broader question. I'm very pleased to welcome first Simona Bonafè, member of the European Parliament from the Partito Democratico in Italy, who will focus on European citizenship and will also raise the question what the content of that citizenship is and if it's sufficiently strong, or if there is a need for adding other elements such as social rights to it, but also whether or not there should be a European policy on how you get this citizenship and how you lose it, and how that relates to the member state competencies of exclusive sovereignty in matters of nationality law. Secondly, we have Jelena Jankic, sitting here next to Simona Bonafè, who is the coordinator of the Global Citizenship Observatory that Martin Fink and myself are also involved in as co-directors. Jelena has published an important book on citizenship in Bosnia and Herzegovina, Macedonia and Montenegro, effects of statehood and identity challenges. And she will be focusing on another topic on which she is really one of the top experts in the world, which is investor citizenship, citizenship for sale. There are more and more states that offer citizenships and residence permits in the emerging global market for the super rich. And that could be one of the phenomena where we do see a thinning out, a marketization, a commodification of citizenship. Now that topic will probably also be relevant for our next speaker, which is Ayelet Shachar. She is the director, she is a director at the Max Planck Institute in Göttingen on religious and cultural and ethnic diversity, where she also heads the program on, now I have to look up my notes.
Ethics, law, and politics.
Ethics, law, and politics. So this is a department within the Max Planck Institute that she is the head of. Ayelet has published several books, but the most relevant one for us is probably her latest one, which is on the birthright lottery, and maybe also her forthcoming one, which is on Olympic citizenship. Finally, we have Martin Fink, who is a professor in political science at the University of Maastricht. As I already mentioned, also a co-director of the Global Citizenship Observatory, and who has recently won an ERC grant on the topic of migrant life courses and legal status transitions. And Martin will be mostly focusing on multiple citizenship. How does the proliferation of multiple citizenships affect citizenship overall, and how has it come about? What are its possible effects on the status of the people who have these multiple passports? So that's the lineup, and without any further ado, I will ask Honorable Bonafè to kick it off. I will ask all speakers to keep it to 7 minutes, so a little bit shorter than on the other panels, because we have several discussants who want to intervene, and I want to give the audience a chance to have a decent Q&A period before we again invite the speakers to respond to these questions.
So first of all, thanks to this invitation, it's an honor for me to be here in this important conference to talk about a key issue for the future of Europe. First of all, what is citizenship? As it has been said, citizenship is a legal relationship between the state and its citizens. It is not only the condition that entitles individuals with certain rights and duties, but it above all allows citizens to contribute to the growth of their community and create their identity. We know that citizenship is granted by sovereign states, and each state decides upon its policies on acquisition, recognition, and or withdrawal. In Europe, by acquiring the citizenship of a member state, we also acquire the European citizenship that doesn't replace the national one, but it is in addition, as Article 9 of the treaty stated. Therefore, we need to ask ourselves about the opportunity to define minimum standard requirements for the acquisition of citizenship. First of all, because we need to acknowledge that the diverse modalities of granting or withdrawing citizenship in member states have huge effects overall union. Secondly, because through citizenship, we need to improve European identity and European social cohesion if we believe in the European project. The management of citizenship policies will be of greater importance in the year to come because of both economic globalization and humanitarian emergencies that foster the immigration flows. European member states' policies on integration and citizenship highly differs. Today, no member state has an unconditional use soli, and only 10 out of 28 member states prescribe to grant citizenship to children born on their soil by foreign parents at certain conditions, such as permanent residence permit of at least one of the two parents. As I said, in Europe we have 28 different policies on citizenship. Now the difference is not only referred to the system of citizenship recognition for newcomers. Differences can also be found in those cases, very critical from my point of view, where member states apply systems of citizenship for sale. I refer here to the case of Malta and Cyprus, where in return for money, and 600,000 euros in Malta, so not so much, it is possible for extra EU citizens to acquire a local passport and therefore also the European citizenship. In this regard, the Parliament has taken a clear position in the past legislature. In 2014, the Parliament condemned with a resolution the Maltese case, stating the importance of genuine links at European level while respecting the sovereignty of member states on citizenship. Moreover, the resolution highlighted that the phenomenon of passport for sale is not only short-sighted, but it also raised security issues in terms of uncontrolled movement of people and capital. It is also because of those cases that I believe we should arrive at some point to a minimum system of common criteria on citizenship at European level, in order both to face the phenomenon of passport for sale and to promote the positive value of genuine links in terms of potential tools to improve the social cohesion. If there is an issue on harmonization when we speak about how a member state grants its citizenship, there is an issue also when we consider the ways in which citizenship can be withdrawn. The issue of citizenship withdrawal stepped more and more in the public debate with reference to security issues and the fight against terrorism. In France, after the attacks, the government raised the argument of withdrawing French citizenship to those found guilty of terrorist attacks. The project did not pass, and it is still a matter of discussion during the presidential electoral campaign. But what this kind of withdrawal would mean concretely? If a person has a double citizenship, the result will be to dump the responsibility of the terrorist on another state. The issue would be even more problematic for a person who doesn't have a double citizenship. In this case, a decision of a withdrawal will result in statelessness. Does the EU have something to say on this situation affecting, in any case, individuals who are also European citizens? The verdict of the European Court of Justice on the Rothman case tells us that member states must have due regard to the status of the European citizenship when determining matters of nationality. The verdict also stated that decisions of citizenship withdrawal when producing statelessness should be proportional to the severity of the case. Well, the more we speak about citizenship, the more the links between national and European citizenship become evident. Today, European citizenship imply mainly civil and political rights, namely freedom of movement, political rights at European and local elections, as well as diplomatic and legal protection. Today, the sense of belonging to the EU is going through a hard time. I believe that a definition of European citizenship also in terms of social rights would be very effective in strengthening the links between citizens and European institutions. Indeed, in Brussels lately, the discussion on the social pillar of the EU is growing bigger. On this, we have an issue. We need to decide if member states are the only active players in this field, or if we can have some specific rights granted directly by the EU. I'm thinking, for example, to the proposal presented by Minister Padoan a few months ago on a common European scheme for unemployment subsidies. On the 70th anniversary of the Treaty of Rome, I believe that the EU is our key to face the current and future challenges. We built the EU on the 4 freedoms. Today, after a severe economic crisis, we know that we need to strengthen it on its social dimension, with actions directly both to native and to genuine new citizens. And I think that this is the challenge for the future of Europe that we have to face as soon as possible. Thanks.
Thank you very much for this initial very broad panorama of the issues that we are going to discuss, and also for staying perfectly within the 7-minute time limit. It just shows the special skills that you get as an MEP in this regard. Jelena, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Today I'll speak about the changing notion of genuine links, and I'll do so by focusing on investment-based citizenship programs. And I'll try and do it, by giving you some background on the types of these programs, and then I'll try and put forward an argument on the emergence of this global governance of citizenship through the lenses of these programs. During my speech today, I'll refer to a couple of examples, such as those Simona has already mentioned, ones of Malta and Cyprus. But if you wish to ask me more about the details of various programs that exist not only in Europe, but also around the world, please feel free to do so during the Q&A session. So, to introduce the topic to you, when I speak about investment-based citizenship, I refer to obtaining a legal status of membership in exchange for financial assets. And essentially, what's happening today is that we have 3 forms of investment-based citizenship. It can be granted on the grounds of the state's discretion to naturalize investors on grounds of national interest, meaning that in this case, the investment that someone puts into a state is considered to be of special interest to that state. Secondly, it can be done through specific investment-based citizenship programs whereby a passport of a state is exchanged for a fixed amount of money. And these are the programs that exist nowadays in the EU, in Cyprus and Malta, but also in a couple of other states in the world. The third form of investment-based citizenship are the so-called path to citizenship programs, or the residence for investment schemes, whereby an investor is granted residence rights in the first instance, and after a couple of years, the possibility for obtaining the citizenship of a particular state. So in some form, historically, we can trace these programs back as to ancient Rome. And there's this anecdote that's also cited, funnily enough, in the Bible, of a centurion who arrested St. Peter, who became a Roman citizen by actually paying Roman authorities a given amount of money. So we can see that the exchange between membership and money has existed or has dated a long way back in history. If we think, however, about the last 40 years, we can see that there have been two waves of development of these investment-based citizenship programs. So the first wave emerged in the 1980s when the first programs were established in St. Kitts and Nevis and the Commonwealth of Dominica. At the same time, a number of European countries used the state's discretion to naturalize investors. The second wave of these programs actually proliferated after the global financial crisis, so in the post-2008 era, and we can see an increasing number of countries adopting specific programs. So if you try and compare these two waves of programs, you'll see that there has been a shift from the state's discretion towards, in a way, more regulated programs for investment-based citizenship. And this said, it brings me to my argument of the speech today. So there appears to be a trend towards an emerging market for citizenship, and this market is starting to be regulated through a multi-layered interaction among governments, the private sector, lobbyists, and supranational institutions. And I think the example of the investment-based program in Malta gives a lot of insight into what's happened there. Simona mentioned that the original program was actually foresaw only the exchange between money and citizenship, and it has been developed by a private intermediary company for the purposes of the government of Malta. Yet after the let's say, after the discussions in the European Parliament and the discussions with the European Commission, the government of Malta decided to change that program and add additional requirements to the investment-based citizenship scheme. And this is where you can see this multi-layered interaction that essentially creates this governance of citizenship by investment programs. And through these programs, we can see three things, and I'll try and be brief here. A, we can see the withering of sovereignty. The regulation of citizenship is no longer a prerogative of sovereign states, even though, as Rogers Brubaker said in the 1990s, citizenship was the last bastion of national sovereignty. Secondly, we can see that the notion of genuine links, which has been put forward in the 1950s through the Nottebohm judgment, is changing in its nature and content. And we need to now think hard about what constitutes a link strong enough for a person to become a citizen of a given state. And finally, we come to the notion of what does citizenship mean today? Because investment-based citizenship programs are inevitably going to lead to a commodification of citizenship, whereby citizenship or membership in a state will be equalized with a passport. And obviously, a passport, if seen as a matter of property, that gives you visa-free access, opportunities for children, or a preferable tax regime, can actually, in that way, seen as a property, be sold on the market, whereby its value will be decided by the laws of supply and demand. Yet, in deciding whom to naturalize, states can no longer regulate by themselves. And this is why we have these additional conditions, such as residence, such as links with the state, such as the absence of security threats. And these have been developed through this multi-layered interaction between governments and supranational organizations, but also through the interference of different companies. So I'll leave it here, and we can discuss further in the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jelena. Now, Ayelet, can you try to broaden up this topic that seems to involve a conflict between instrumental values of citizenship and non-instrumental or identity values of citizenship, the genuine links idea. How is that playing out in the broader framework?
Okay, great. Thank you very much. First of all, good morning, everyone. Buongiorno. We're here in Fiesole. Buenos dias. Guten Tag. Bonjour. Shalom. I could go on. It's a real pleasure to be here. I want to thank our chair, Professor Rainer Baubuk, for this invitation, and also the organizing committee. It's really a pleasure to be here and to share some of my thoughts on this issue with you. And my comments today are drawing on a forthcoming publication entitled Citizenship for Sale, with a question mark at the end, which will appear in the Oxford Handbook of Citizenship, which actually 3 of the 4 co-editors are sitting here in front of you. Now, in the interest of time, I would like to make 3 points. And I will begin with an overview of the broad trend we are witnessing. And thank you, Yelena, because you did such a wonderful exposition that you're saving me some time so I could draw on the fact that you have just heard this presentation. Then I will move to the diagnostic level, and then as time permits, to what I will call the perspective. I will talk a little bit about the normative and potential policy implications of the kinds of changes and trends that we are seeing. And as I will speak to you, I will be wearing 2 hats, so I'll switch a little bit between them. One hat will be the lawyer's hat, and the other one would be more of the political theorist hat. And as I said, I'll switch between them, and hopefully together this will allow an opportunity to address the question of the instrumental versus the non-instrumental components of citizenship. So first, on the first point of the overview, so what really is being sold? And I think we've just heard a very nice elucidation. In some cases, there's a direct trade, a cash for passport exchange, a direct exchange, most blatant commodification. If you want to have the strongest example in Europe, indeed, it would be Malta and Cyprus. You can think about the Caribbean nations. St. Kitts and Nevis is a famous example. So there you would pay a hefty sum, and in return, you would get a passport. There's some due diligence, some kind of review, but in some cases, you're eligible to receive your passport within 6 to 8 weeks without ever having stepped on the territory of the country, which is now your passport issuing country. So that, I think, would be for us the most extreme example. But other countries are selling something which is a bit less explicit. They're selling access, either access to territory as a first entry, as an entry visa, or a more common procedure would be to sell residency, either temporary or permanent. So here you can think about Canada and the United States. Canada, until it abolished its policy in 2014, granted landed immigrant status. The US grants you a conditional green card, and after 2 years, you get a green card in exchange for your investment. So these are the kinds of things, and I would treat them under the same heading as citizenship for sale programs, despite their internal variation, because you cannot receive citizenship unless you've actually been granted those previous steps. That's why I'm putting them together under one heading. Now, there's also a very special market that we're witnessing, and it's very interesting to observe. It's a government-controlled kind of exchange. So if you, as an individual, anyone in this room, if you wanted to sell your passport on the free, if you were to put it on eBay, it's a crime. You're not permitted to do so. If you are a non-citizen of the state, and I flew in from Frankfurt, let's assume someone comes without a European passport tomorrow morning and says to the border agent, I would like to purchase European citizenship. I'm going to bribe you and pay you 1,000 euros. Would you allow me to get in? Again, you're not permitted to do so. So we actually have very, very strict controls against the sale of citizenship, with the exception of when governments introduce these programs. So that in itself is a puzzle. Why can governments engage in something like this? Is it legitimate? And why are countries doing this? The why I'm going to keep for the Q&A, otherwise I will breach the 7-minute restriction that we have. But what governments, in the brief answer, the most economic answer would be to say they're trying to attract capital into their own specific jurisdiction. They're competing with other countries which are trying to attract the global 1%, the super wealthy who can afford the sums, and in some cases the sums are very high, say a minimum of €1 million or a little over €1 million million euros now in Malta. That has to be mobile capital in addition to your net worth. And in the UK, you would have to pay 2 million British pounds. So these are significant sums. So most individuals would not be in a position to do so, to have such free capital that they can move around the globe. So it is really a very specific market for a very specific potential clientele. And again, the concern, or part of the concerns with this policy, is that in addition to the transfer of funds, very, very little is required. Indeed, there are some background conditions that you have to fulfill, but in any kind of a strong understanding of genuine links as civic ties, all of that is absent in most of these programs. You're not required to really establish residency. Even Malta is more nominal. I think you've actually written about this. You need to have a contract, but you don't necessarily even have to be there for the full 1 year. You don't have to know the language of the country. You don't need to know anything about the political system. So all of the requirements that we typically would ask in the context of naturalization are absent. There's an exemption saying somehow bringing the money absorbs you of all of that. And I would want to say that what we're seeing is it's the shell of citizenship. It's a legal entitlement, but without any of the content. And I would want to emphasize that as a concern. So the second point about the overview, and I'll be very quick, is that it's true that we're seeing this very specific market for the super wealthy of the world. At the same time, and they're getting an easy pass, much, much easier for them to purchase citizenship. At the same time, if we were to look at the broader set of policies, again, dealing only with naturalization, we are actually seeing a trend which is the reverse trend. We're seeing a greater restriction. So if you were to look at family-based migrants, if you were to look at low-skilled migrants, if you were to look at humanitarian cases, we're seeing more and more and more restrictions actually imposed either at the initial point of entry, or if you're already settled in the country, or if you're seeking naturalization. So you can think about citizenship tests, civic requirements, linguistic requirements. There's a whole set of requirements that we now impose. Some of the very same countries that sell citizenship now do, on the other hand, or the other side, they create this much more restrictive policy. So we need to address this contrast. How could it be that countries can, at the very same time, actually restrict admission for the vast majority of the population, while at the same time granting this easy pass for the rich and wealthy? And in some cases, you might even need to show linguistic knowledge, cultural understanding of the country, some knowledge about the political system, even before you have stepped in. So Germany and the Netherlands, for example, for family-based, for spouses would require that. So there's just a total inconsistency that we're seeing here. If you're worried politically, this does appear like a double standard. It does appear to benefit a global elite. And it would be very, very hard, I think, for a politician to actually explain this contradiction. And I would want to hear an explanation. How can this stand? And it might seem that the humanitarian cases would seem intuitively to be much, much stronger if you're looking for an easy pass rather than allowing people who are already quite well off globally. So that's where I would leave this point. So now just drawing one distinction, which I want to state. It was very interesting in 2013 when the Prime Minister of Malta actually introduced a program. He was selling the citizenship for sale as looking for people who are well networked and people who have talent. Now, this is a very interesting rhetorical move because we do know that most countries do have a category of allowing people in on the basis of special skills or talent. So you can think about scientists, artists, athletes, a whole range of kind of requirements that countries do actually give privileged access. I would want to distinguish that component of skills or human capital from pure capital. Because in order to actually gain the mobility of a human capital-based or skills-based migration, the individual who has that special talent needs to move to the country that's admitting him or her, because it's encapsulated in the person. Whereas with citizenship for sale, it's monetary. It's just, you can, in theory, just click a button, a wire transfer, and receive your citizenship, especially, again, as I said, the Caribbean countries would be the most extreme examples of that. The person might not even have to move into this new country. So it's really the transfer of capital, no longer the transfer of, no longer the mobility of individuals. And again, I want to point that out as a special character and feature and a problematic feature of these new kinds of programs. And I'll be very, very quick, given that I see that my 7 minutes are up. And just to quote for you from one of the larger law firms that actually is engaged globally in these kinds of transfer, when they sell or when they advertise these programs, they say that you can acquire citizenship quickly and simply, this is a quote, quickly and simply, without any disruption to your life. So basically you can go ahead and shop the world and get one or more additional citizenship. So again, it really transforms any kind of understanding that we have of citizenship. So here I'm going to move very quickly to the third part, which is some of the normative and policy implications, and I'll do this very telegraphically. So one concern that I mentioned, it's the shell of citizenship. It's no longer the content of citizenship. If you think that citizenship has some component, a relational component, a political component, potentially a social rights component, all of this seems to be hollowed out in this context. So that's one point that I want to emphasize. The second one, if you're thinking either globally or locally, you can think about these programs as problematic on grounds of exacerbating inequality among potential incomers. I mentioned that earlier. If you're an asylum seeker versus a very, very wealthy individual, if there's a priority list, why should it be the wealthy person rather than the needy person? Also, if you're already in the country, if other immigrants have to actually comply with these citizenship test, linguistic requirements, residency requirements, and the super rich do not, how can we justify that? And also among citizens, because some of these programs actually permit you to hold citizenship, but you're not obliged to do anything that citizens would normally be required to do. I'm not just talking about civic activities, which are volitional, but you might not be required to pay taxes, to have jury duty in a country like the United States, or it's mandatory. In theory, you could think about a country that has military service. None of that applies to you if you bought citizenship. So in that sense, it's exacerbating inequality from within. So what can be done? Philosophers would ask, are there some things that money cannot buy? Are there things that are just by definition should not be put on the market? And if you want to think about examples, body organs, for example, is something that, as a policy decision, we have decided should not be for sale. We don't permit selling votes. We don't permit selling babies. We don't permit selling persons. In fact, that would be slavery. That actually, going back to the Romans, perhaps they permitted some very narrow perception of citizenship for sale. They also permitted slavery. That doesn't mean we should follow it today. So there are some things we have to ask, I think, that question, are there some things that are not for sale? I would want to say we should abolish citizenship for sale. I'm way too much of a realist, so here I would need to put on my lawyer's hat. I don't think this is going to go away anytime soon because we're seeing a rising trend. So then the question is, how can you regulate? How can you restrict? How can you connect us back to some notion of genuine links, which are meaningful links? I would not put here ancestral links or blood-based links. I would actually say civil links, which is what we typically try to require when we think about citizenship as a progressive way, as a way to actually allow individuals who are not yet members to become members. And also third countries can have an effect. I mean, I think there are actually very, very interesting regulatory ideas that we could think through. If there's anyone from the Commission here who has worked on this, I would love to have exchange notes with you to hear about what you think could be done at the European context. But the fact that we might not have legal tools now, for me, doesn't mean that we cannot invent them. So I would think this is a real invitation to try and think creatively about how to address this issue if we indeed agree that it is a concern. So thank you very much. I did exceed my allotted time.
Thank you, Ayelet. I think you've made good use of the time that Simona and Jelena graciously donated to you.
Thank you.
Now we come to Martin Fink, and the question there is really something that Richard Rose in the previous panel session called the Goldoni problem. You know, is it possible to serve two masters? At least this is how in the old times, dual citizenship was perceived widely. And still, we see this phenomenon that is increasingly being tolerated and also picked up by people who are interested in it. Okay. It's already there, yes.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Reiner and the EOI for the invitation. So I'll talk about dual citizenship, and I would like to address three issues. Attitudes. So what do we actually think about dual citizenship? Who is in favor, who is against? And I'll distinguish between immigrants, and natives. I want to say something about opportunities and constraints. So what's in it for people, and what are actually the difficulties in restricting dual citizenship if we would want that? And thirdly, something about the trends. What do we see over the last 60 or so years? And my conclusion is that generally dual citizenship is really a self-sustaining phenomenon. It is very difficult to get away from it. I think it's also undesirable unless we perhaps radically rethink what is citizenship. Okay, so what is dual citizenship or multiple citizenship? It's a legal status of citizenship held by a person in two or more countries. In the case of multiple citizenship, And so traditionally the problems were seen as of loyalty. So can you indeed be loyal to multiple masters, for example, in military conflicts? I think most importantly in the international system, this was seen as a problem of responsibility. So which state actually has the right to diplomatic protection of a citizen anywhere in the world? So it is negative attitudes towards dual citizenship were there to avoid potential conflicts between states. And more recently, we see this also linked to security. For example, in Finland, there's a proposal now to restrict access to high security positions for dual citizens. And this is actually something that is still fairly rarely practiced. Now, let me go to the first question. What do people think actually of dual citizenship? And I think it really depends on who you are. So if you are part of a diaspora movement, you see here a picture of the Haitian diaspora movement. They campaigned very strongly for dual citizenship, basically because they lived themselves out of the country, might have naturalized in the US, but of course were very interested to keep the link with their home country. And the fact that they built up a life in a new country doesn't mean that they cannot maintain simultaneously a link with the origin country. In the bottom, you see a picture of actually an interesting political phenomenon. This was a joint lobby by an American expat living in Denmark and a Danish expat living outside of Denmark. And they teamed up, as you see here, for the 2015 amendment of the Danish law, which was one of the most recent countries where dual citizenship after many years was actually accepted. And for these immigrants, of course, they are particularly interested in dual citizenship because they want to have citizenship in the country where they reside, because this gives access to rights, not only political rights, but often also to a stronger socioeconomic position. We see that on the labor market, for example, to resident security, and of course also to international mobility. Now, if we look at natives, and here you see a graph of a survey that I did in the Netherlands back in 2012, where we asked people, what do you think of dual citizenship? And we did that in 2 questions. We asked, should dual citizenship be allowed for immigrants, people who naturalize in the Netherlands, and should it be allowed for Dutch people who naturalize abroad? And somewhat surprisingly, what you see is that many people are actually skeptical, but as you see in the red bars, actually the opposition towards immigrant dual citizenship in the Netherlands was much more high than towards immigrant dual citizenship. And you could call this a double standard. And there's very little research on this in other countries, but I wouldn't be surprised if we find a similar pattern in many other countries. And when we looked closer in the data, we saw that these negative attitudes were linked to general skepticism about immigration, about globalization, and about cultural threat to national identity. Now, here a quote from the LA Times, which I think symbolizes a strong constraint against dual citizenship. So many people, when they say, well, citizenship, naturalization, it may be a tool towards immigrant integration, but maintaining the citizenship with your origin country puts an asterisk on that new status. And actually, when we look at the literature, there is very little evidence for that. First of all, there's very little research on this, so that's why there is little evidence. But the people who have looked in this generally do not find that there were strong that the so-called citizenship premium, which immigrants get by naturalizing in a new country, the premium on the labor market, for example, or in socio-political participation, that is actually not conditioned by maintaining the citizenship of the origin country. And actually, when you look in many examples, we see very few problems where dual citizenship really comes up in terms of conflicts between an individual and a state or between states. Now, if we wanted to prevent dual citizenship, can we actually do this? Well, this is actually very difficult. When we look at the Netherlands, after there was a restriction at the end of the 1990s, we saw that the number of dual citizens actually still increased significantly from 600,000 to 1.2 million. And this is because, of course, dual citizenship also arises because children have parents with multiple citizenship statuses, and for those kind of situations, it's very difficult to restrict this. Okay, here a long list that I cannot all deal with, but you see here a picture of Mr. Afroim, who was central in the US Supreme Court judgment that actually accepted dual citizenship and very much conceived this as an individual right. So the Constitution in the US doesn't give the government the right to take away somebody's citizenship unless he or she voluntarily expatriates. And this is something that we see in many countries. So if we want to restrict dual citizenship, we also need to reconceive citizenship as an individual right. Gender equality is very problematic if we want to restrict this, because dual citizenship arises out of gender equality, because we treat men and women similarly. They both can transmit citizenship, and therefore we have dual citizenship. Immigrant integration and diaspora relations I already mentioned. Let me say something about the trend towards dual citizenship. And what we see is a very clear trend. If you look at expatriate dual citizenship, so naturalizing abroad and being allowed to keep your citizenship of origin, we see that in the 1960s, these are data from a data set that I built up with colleagues at Maastricht University. In 1960, only 40% of countries accepted dual citizenship, whereas in 2015, over 70% of countries accepted this. You see some world regional variation, but actually the trend is very much in the same direction. And if you look closely in the data, you see that almost all of the changes on dual citizenship over the last 20 years were unilaterally in the direction of accepting dual citizenship. Now, we also see this when we look closer at the data, is that this trend is because diasporas, they campaign for this. And of course, once they have dual citizenship, it's very difficult to take it back for them. So implementing politically restrictive measures of dual citizenship, and we saw that in the Netherlands, is actually very difficult. These were blocked by politically engaged diaspora. Now, when we look at renunciation requirements, so the other way of restricting dual citizenship by asking immigrants who want to naturalize to renounce previously their citizenship of origin, here are data from the Global Citizenship Observatory, where you see that actually in Europe, the pattern is still a bit mixed. So the blue countries accept dual citizenship, the reds are still restrictive. You can find also these data in one of the leaflets that you find here at the State of the Union event. So in Europe, the pattern is mixed, but all of the countries that changed almost all of the countries that changed in the last 20 years were moved in the direction of allowing. Okay, so last slide, let me conclude. So what we see is that dual citizenship is very much a self-sustaining phenomenon. There are many people who campaign for this, immigrants in the country where they reside and immigrants who live abroad. For them it is really an important issue because it gives mobility rights, access to socio-political rights, economic rights and resident security, mobility. If we want to restrict this, we need to reconceive citizenship as an individual right and also possibly reconceive gender equality. This is how this was restricted in the past, and that's no longer acceptable. And so reverting back to these restrictive policies is, I think, very difficult. The diasporas are already enfranchised, and I think it's also undesirable for immigrants. It's important that they have a good status, and what we see in the literature is also if we ask people to renounce their citizenship, then this significantly lowers naturalization rates. So, and that means that immigrant integration also becomes more difficult in the countries where they reside. I will stop here. Thanks.
Thank you, Martin. I think we've now a very good and broad overview of the topic. And we have 15 minutes for the Q&A, which is very good. And then eventually I will give the floor again to the four panelists for 3 up to maximum 4 minutes to respond to the questions that they have heard. We have 3 people who have asked to get the floor specifically. And then I'll open it up for questions from the general audience. So let me first ask Oscar Alberto Lema Buzor, who is a PhD researcher at the UI in the law department.
Sorry. Okay. Thank you very much, all the panelists, for their presentations. As Professor Bauge has said, a third-year researcher in law, and what I research as laws that engage with diasporas by the countries of origin. So my question, although we have spoken much about investor citizenship, is related, and a lot of countries are giving citizenship to diasporas. But the question kind of is the same. Is there a genuine link? Is it enough? And when I pose my research, when I present it, I always get more or less the same question, and it's the one I'm giving to you, so maybe you can help me in solving how I reply, which is, there is no generalized opposition, or we don't see any generalized opposition in state practice to many of these questionable citizenship granting. So how can it be enforced? How can limits, how can real links or genuine links can be, how can we enforce that citizenship is real? Because except for very few stances, the Parliament, the European Parliament resolution or so on, there's no real opposition. So how can we enforce that doubtful citizenship is not recognized or does not have effects?
Thank you very much, Oscar, for bringing up this topic, which I think is really important to add. Genuine links can be diluted through marketization of citizenship or through citizenship based on distant ancestry that makes you a member of a diaspora without having any particular links to the country that awards you that status. The next question comes from Michele Nori, who is a Marie Curie Fellow currently at the UI.
Thanks very much for the opportunity and the presentations. One very simple and straight question would be, is there an agenda to go towards a European passport, European citizenship, in order to tackle with a number of these issues and maybe bring the debate forward?
Thank you. And can you pass on the microphone to Sam Schmidt, who is sitting next to you, who is a second-year researcher in the SBS department at the UI.
Yes, thank you also very much for your very interesting presentations. My question focuses on investor citizenship, and you have mentioned that the problem there can be that it's generally not based on genuine links. It becomes an instrument of global elites, and maybe also it contributes to global inequalities. It contributes to the importance of social class, and it privileges a certain global elite, and it may hollow out citizenship. One of the content of citizenship is not only that it leads to mobility rights, especially when we look at the acquisition of EU citizenship, but it leads also to political rights. So my question is, how problematic do you think investor citizenship is in relation to acquiring voting rights in countries? Because voting rights for investor citizens may corrupt politics and may foster the rule of money in politics. And to be sure, the countries Malta and Cyprus, which are the prime examples in Europe, they do not allow non-resident citizens to vote. They have very limited non-resident voting rights. But still, there is a case of Austria where someone that has access citizenship through such a path has founded the party Team Stronach, and so was able to manipulate or to come into the democratic process via his money. So what role do you think does this potential undermining of democratic institutions by investor citizenship play? Do you think it's important, and do you think it could also provide an additional rationale for maybe supranational guidelines to granting investor citizenship?
Just a tiny little factual correction to Sam's question. Frank Stronach is an Austrian citizen by birth who became a Canadian citizen. The scandal is that he got a special permission to retain his Austrian citizenship that otherwise is automatically lost if you acquire foreign nationality. So Austria is still among the restrictive countries also for the immigrants. And then he went on and founded a party in Austria.
Thanks for the correction.
Okay. So now I invite the general audience, and I see already a couple of hands raised. So maybe let's start with Maurizio Ferreira over there.
Yes, thank you very much. I'd like to raise a very general point. If we think of the experience of the historical federations, there were key moments in which the issue of which is the ultimate authority for defining the content of citizenship. Is it the states or the federated entities, or is it the federal government? And we know, for example, in the US, this moment came after the Civil War and led to the Civil Rights Act that was then constitutionalized in the 14th Amendment, which clarified that it is the United States that defines the content of citizenship. Now, it seems to me that Brexit is actually opening up an unprecedented historical moment which registered a counter-movement, because the privileges of the federal, quote-unquote, supranational citizenships are going to be taken away, given back to the federated units, in this case a member state, which doesn't want to be a member state anymore, but with a majority of only just above 50%, depriving the people from the supranational citizenship. And I've read an article which I found very provocative by Glyn Morgan, in which he says, that's the bottom line, that this is the right moment to problematize this issue of whether the European citizenship can be taken away or not.
Thank you. Can you pass it on to the lady sitting next to you, please? Yes. No, the lady first was the lady in the back, and then.
Yes. This is my British passport, and I really resent the idea of losing my European citizenship. I was actually conceived at the League of Nations in Geneva 80 years and 9 months ago. My parents were journalists at the League of Nations, where they were trying to prevent the Second World War. And it inevitably happened because of the division, the nationalism, and so forth. I work with Romanian Roma, who really are world citizens. They have the Sanskrit language, which they share with Chinese Roma, with Russian Roma, all over the world. But they are denied citizenship in our terms. I find that because they lack decent housing, education, and so forth, they fall outside of the spheres of our privileges. I very much value that image of the world without frontiers that the astronauts first saw. Where we are born, where we are raised is an accident. But wherever we are, we do have the responsibility to work for the human rights of our own country, of our continent, of the globe. And I would like to just put it into that perspective, that I would love this to be European passport as well as the British passport, to be here in Florence with that sense.
Thank you. Next is the gentleman from Denmark.
Yeah, hi. My name is Bonde, and I was in the convention drafting this citizenship. And at the time, it was set in the rules that it did not add any new rights for citizens. And it was at the same time clear that this was a sentence to avoid referendums, constitutional matters, and it was also clear that it would be developed by the court. And it has happened now. I guess there are far more than 100 verdicts, but I haven't read them. Have any of you read the verdicts on the citizenship and can explain if they have added rights or just settled normal conflicts? Another question on Brexit. In the British repeal bill, it's mentioned that since it does not add any new rights, it raises no problems that Britain will not uphold the citizenship in their interpretation of different laws. Have you any examples on the conflicts it may raise? Thanks.
Okay, now I think I've had many hands on the other side of the aisle, so I'd like to switch back and forth if you don't mind, but I'll try to take records of the other side.
Thanks a lot. I'm a legal historian, and I would like to come back to the definition of what is the minima, the credo minima to establish a passport, a European passport. You all said that a transfer of capital, whereas money capital can't be a good solution. I very much agree. And how about what Bourdieu called social capital? And I would have another hint. If you go back to what is citizenship as a performative act, it has to be enacted. You don't have to live in the country, but it has to be enacted by some kind of performative oath. And would this, I'm thinking of Canada, loyalty oath to a country, would this be possible at the European level?
Thank you. I've seen more hands there. There was a lady in the far back on this side, and then we move it forward again. Yeah, please raise your hand.
Hi. Well, my question has just been repeated, but I wanted to flag another issue on the Maltese case, which has been mentioned quite often, and that is whether you have investigated the links between the citizenship and corruption, because the latest twist in this case have been quite serious allegations against the head of Secretariat of the Prime Minister on this front, on the fact that the head of Secretariat might have been receiving kickbacks from the sale of passport. And in a way, if the commodification of citizenship wasn't atrocious enough as it was, the fact that big transactions of easy money, as in the case of Malta, would make the case for further regulation of such schemes by the European Union too, I would think. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniela. Now I've seen two more hands raised on this side, so yes, the gentleman in the second row, please. No.
Oh, sorry,
yeah.
a second.
You also wanted? Okay.
Thanks. Might I just broaden out the discussion very briefly and ask perhaps for comments from our learned people at the top. Brexit, and perhaps one unintended consequence of this is rebadging of people. I'm from Ireland, and we obviously have seen an increase in British people who are able to claim citizenship through descent, seeking to get Irish passports. We've also seen in the UK, indeed some people who had to flee Germany during the last war, considering seeking German citizenship, which they're entitled to because of their uncertain status post-Brexit. I suppose my query being, in terms of citizenship, I think of it from the perspective of the obligations which citizenship brings to you, but somebody who's perhaps taking a second citizenship for good reasons, but, you know, would not ordinarily be doing so, the implications down the line for this for those people and society in general. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentations. And my name is Martina Moscardi. I live here in Florence. And from your presentations, it seems to me that maybe some of the people that we have, they have maybe double or multiple citizenship. It's a matter of having some benefits or having some profits from having double citizenship. So I would like to know if there is a project just to have a fight against what we said in Malta, in Cyprus, or even more far in Bahamas. I know that we have also the selling of citizenship for money. And I'm aware that the problem of fighting against terrorism in the EU perspective is fighted with the anti-money laundering directives and procedures. But on the other hand, I would like to know if there is a sort of project in education of having a responsible citizenship for the persons, for the people, because it's not a matter of having benefits and brides shopping, I would say, within Europe.
Okay, thank you. We take one last question from Chun.
Hi, first, my name is Chun. I'm a PhD student in Maastricht. I'm going to keep my question very short. I'm thinking in all this area about, we're talking about genuine links, what are the civic duties, who should be a citizen. And then I run into a problem of how do you then put that legally? If you take into consideration, if you think, okay, if we start defining it in terms of ethnicity, are we capable of putting that into a law? Only certain races can be our citizens. Or if we put it in terms of loyalty, what is loyalty when you put it legally? And then my general question is, are there these genuine links and these criteria that we can use to determine who can and who should be a citizen? And if we can't put them legally, should they even be criteria for citizenship?
Thank you very much, and big apologies to those who didn't get the floor, but I've been instructed to strictly watch the time. So we'll now go back to the podium and we'll do it in reverse order. So I'll ask Martin to respond to any questions that he feels addressed by.
Okay, thanks. So let me keep it brief because I don't think there was a specific question, but I would like to say something about the European passport. So some people sometimes say, well, this EU citizenship, is that a form of dual citizenship, right? And obviously it isn't, in the sense that it's derivative, right? So EU citizenship is derived from national citizenship, but I do think in the context of these discussions, and the gentleman mentioned the Brits acquiring Irish citizenship, and of course also the other way around for people who want to solidify their status in the UK. Yeah, I do think that this EU citizenship in a way undermines alternative ways to dual citizenship, right? So I see dual citizenship as a way for people to solidify their status, immigrants in a country where they weren't born, but also immigrants in another country. But of course, if we were to disconnect rights from citizenship in the way that this is done in the EU, of course you see that there might be less need for dual citizenship, right? So dual citizenship especially comes up now that the rights become more uncertain. And we see this also in naturalization rates in the EU, where of course generally we see that EU citizens residing in another member state are actually much less interested to naturalize in that other member state. So EU citizenship provides a certain catalog of rights that actually makes naturalization less relevant, at least in terms of resident security and rights. And of course, the main exception to that rule would be political rights at the national level. Right? But so I do think that this is an interesting example for if we want to think beyond dual citizenship, and people who see this as a problem, that a kind of status, let's say multi-level citizenship status, such as the EU citizenship, would be an interesting alternative. And that's what I have in mind when I say that if we want to go beyond dual citizenship, we need to rethink citizenship in the sense of deconnecting some of the rights and some of the content from this national citizenship status.
Thank you, Martin.
Can I suggest actually, Rainer, that you would intervene on political rights?
Sorry?
Do you want to speak on political rights?
You are free to take up any issue that you feel.
No, but I think you should speak about it. So I'm inviting you to say 2 minutes.
No, my role is the chair, so
okay,
I can ask questions. I cannot.
Okay, all right. So there were lots of questions. I'm only going to respond to some of them. Mostly, I think, Oscar, the one you started with, and it was reiterated in different ways. The question about genuine links, how can we think about this in a productive way? And I would say 2 things. First, actually going back to the last question, I don't think that the answer would be to say, what's your ancestry? What's your ethnicity? I would see these as ascriptive components. I think that would be a step back if that would be our response to these kinds of tensions that we're witnessing today. It would be more restrictive. So I think I would want to state that very clearly. If we think about genuine links, some of the work that was done by myself, by Joseph Cairns, by Rainer Baubuk, a good number of other people, was to think about ways to grant legal status, for example, for people who are undocumented, who have no legal status currently. But if you think about the United States, that's a classic example. Over 12 million people who have no status. Many of them have been in the country for years and years and years, have children who are themselves American citizens, have worked, have contributed in many, many ways through volunteering in organization, social organization, by just educating their kids and volunteering on the school. There are just so many civic components that you could take, that you could weigh into the discussion of whether someone should gain citizenship. So I would draw on some of that work. I don't think that it's not at all, you don't have to go through the ethnic route. I think you would have to go actually through the kind of social ties, the ties to a specific place, to a specific community or sub-community within a larger community. That would be the basis for membership. And I think we have lots of examples, including actual live legal examples, that this is operational. It's not just theoretical. And this would just lead me to the question about the diasporas. It's a very, very interesting question, because some people would say, just allow diasporas to expand citizenship as much as they wish. I think that given that I do think that there has to be this civil link to some extent, there are again some examples that you can think about. You might say there's a generational limit, perhaps 3 generations, but not 20 generations, because the link then becomes absolutely blood-based and empty, assuming that there's no connection. You might say have people come back. You might say, do they know the language? Do they have some kind of a cultural connection? That might be a range of considerations that you would take into account. But again, I would not just allow it to be just ancestry, because then all that we're doing is really emphasizing an ascriptive component. I would want to move away from that. And just one last point, because there were a lot of questions asked about corruption, about political rights. I think those are very, very vital and important rights, and I would just add them to the list of concerns that we are witnessing with citizenship for sale. But again, I want to think about this as an opportunity. This is, in a way, what you would say in North America. It's an example which is in your face. You cannot ignore it. So let's use it as an opportunity to try and rethink what is it that we think is still valuable for membership, either at the national or at the supranational level. How can these issues be regulated? Who should be regulating them? Who should have voice in these decisions? I think these are very, very foundational questions. If we make this into an opportunity to do so, we will have benefit. And I think you're right, also the gentleman who mentioned Brexit as a real vital moment to potentially explore these issues. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. There have been so many questions, but I'll try and pick up only a couple of points. And I wanted to start from Ayelet's very nice distinction between the talent migration and essentially citizenship for sale programs, whereby talent migration actually creates engaged citizens, whereby investment-based citizenship programs create, in a way, disengaged citizens who just use their passports instrumentally. And yes, I think we've heard quite a lot of times today that citizenship should not be for sale, but the sad fact is it is. And the standards for this, for the sale, are at the moment regulated by something that's called the industry, or the intermediary companies that lobby with governments, with also with other firms within states, etc., etc. So they, in a way, as it has happened in the case of Malta, Cyprus, and other countries, they, in a way, set the standards at present, which I think causes quite a lot of concern. And this is what brings me to both points, to the 2 points that both Sam and Daniela mentioned, the potential for corruption. The potential for corruption of those involved in the making of these policies. So this is something that has happened. It also has happened not only in the case of Malta, but also in cases of Austria, etc., in the country which I come from, which is Montenegro. So essentially, there's quite a lot of potential for the corruption of policymaking. At the same time, there's potential for corruption of the political process, and not only by, in a way, corrupting the single vote of investors, because essentially there are countries who limit voting rights to resident citizens only. Yet, if an investor is rich enough to buy a country's passport, he or she will be rich enough to buy a lot of political influence. And this is, I think, something that corrupts the political process even more. So just to briefly conclude and leave some time to Simona and to Rainer to conclude the session, we indeed, I agree with Ayelet, we need to rethink what's valuable in terms of communal membership, and we need to rethink who should be setting standards for the acquisition of citizenship, and whether it's possible to have some, let's say, broader standards that would be either European or at the global level. Because if industry is left to do it, all what's going to happen is citizenship policies that will mirror the interests of companies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Word goes to Simona Bonafé.
So thanks for your questions. Well, I think that this morning we have seen how complicated is this issue in a changing world, and how we need to rethink the citizenship. And it involves a lot of problematic aspects. And this morning we have seen the ones related to double citizenships and passport on sale, but there are a lot of aspects involved. I just say that I had a lot of doubts before coming here that still persist, by the way, but I think that 2 points need to be underlined. The first one is that the genuine link, in my opinion, need to remain crucial. If we don't think that citizenship is a tool, is a useful tool, but if we think that citizenship is a mean to build cohesion, social cohesion, and to build European identity. That's why I think that phenomenon as the passport on sale has to be criticized. This is the first aspect. The second aspect, unfortunately, today there's no discussion about the European citizenship. Well, there's a discussion, but there are no real steps toward European citizenship. And we are talking about return to nationalism, by the way, in the political debate. That's why I talked before of a minimum criteria in member states to grant citizenship and to withdraw citizenship. But I think that a mean to go towards a European citizen could be to give new contents to citizenship. That's why before I was talking about social rights, not only civil rights and political rights, but also social rights that can create a more identification to the European community.
Thank you very much to the 4 speakers on the podium who have really provided lots of insights in very short time. Thanks to the audience for very precise, on-the-point questions. We haven't been able to address and to answer all of them, but I invite you to continue the discussion and to get more information also by visiting the Global Citizenship Observatory online, or you can do it physically here. There is an info point with data that you can visualize yourself, and you can also pick up this brochure that we did together with the Global Citizenship Observatory that spells out some of the facts and figures that are relevant for these debates. With this, I wish you a very good lunch and continuation of the State of the Union conference after that.